Hello, and welcome to another episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla, and I read a ton of books so that I can recommend the best to you. And we just have so many books to talk about today because today is the June wrap up episode. What a month. I feel like it was both, actually, I don't even feel like it went by quickly. June felt like a very long month, but it was a very good month. So I guess that's a positive thing. So many things happened in this month. I read 30 books. We're going to talk about all 30 on this episode. Travis went on stage at the Eras tour, and I officially moved to Long Island for the summer. So I guess I'll just explain it on this episode because I don't know, it just keeps coming up. But I work fully remotely, so I'm spending the summer on Long Island. The month of June, I was back and forth every weekend, which honestly, that's how I usually do the summers when I've had to work in an office. And it's fine. I do it because I like being on Long Island on the weekends. So I could sit by the pool, go to the beach, but it is kind of exhausting going back and forth. I felt like I haven't had a Sunday night to just chill and relax until literally tonight. I am recording this the night before you're listening to it. So it's nice to just be in one place. And yeah, I'm excited. I have July coming up is just a wild, fun month. I've been talking about this for a while. July is my favorite month, period. But my brother's getting married in 12 days from when I'm recording. That same week, that whole week, I have family in town, family events, wedding events, my cousin's graduation party. The next week, I'm going away on a bachelorette trip. The next week is my 30th birthday. So just really great, fun things coming up. But I kind of July is going to be very hectic and social. So I really leaned into just relaxing in June, despite all of the back and forth. And I had a really great month. And like I said, I read 30 books, which is fucking insane. I am so aware of that. I do want to say, and I don't know why sometimes I feel like I have to explain myself of why I read that many books. That is it is a book a day for the month of June. I am aware. 3 of those books were private series rereads, which I literally read in an hour. So that played a little bit of a role into it. But if you are new to K Read What, and obviously we're all new to Professional Book Girl, this is my first summer with the show, my reading picks up so much in the summer because on every weekend I either sit at the pool or at the beach and I literally just read all day for 8 hours of the day, and then some cases I'll read again when I get home at night. So a typical weekend for me in the summer really is 3 books, which that's just what's normal for me. What's normal for you is cool. Don't feel bad about how much I read. Feel bad about your reading because of how much I read. I'm not normal, really. But so that's what started this month in June. I'm assuming July won't be like that, but honestly, who knows though, because now that I'm going to be full-time on Long Island, the second it's 5:30 and I'm done with work, I'm going to the pool until the pool closes at 7. So I typically my nightly reading routine outside of the summer is I won't start reading sometimes until 9 or 10 o'clock at night because it depends if my shows are on. I don't always read before dinner, but in the summer I will be. So I'm just basically all of this to say, get used to these high numbers for me from the summer. That is just I don't know. Okay, I'm rambling too much about this. Does anyone really care? Beyond that, like I said, I had a really great month. What did I do? I had a lot of fun things going on. The days that I was in the city, I was pretty much there because I had things going on. So I went to a few fun book events. I went to the premiere of My Lady Jane, which I have been seeing all over TikTok now. And I agree with what everyone's saying. Everybody needs to watch it. I only saw the first episode. I'm actually planning on watching more tonight after I finish recording this, but it was a very cool full circle moment for me with My Lady Jane. I actually have never spoken about that book or posted about it on Kayla Web because I read it years before I had my page. My senior year of college is when I got back into reading. And for some reason, I literally don't know how that book ended up in my hands. And I wasn't into the Tudors at the time. This is the book that really introduced me to the craziness of the Tudors. So somehow this book ends up in my hands. And that year for spring break, I went to Florida with my family. First, my sister and I went alone and visited. My grandma was still alive at the time and my aunts and uncles that live in Florida. And then my dad met us there and we went to Disney. And I just vividly remember reading this book, My Lady Jane, on the plane and being so into it and so obsessed. And it's basically like a fanfic of Lady Jane Grey's life. So Lady Jane Grey was Queen of England for 9 days after Edward the sixth or seventh died. He was Henry VIII's son. And then they like basically Mary was supposed to get the crown, but they didn't. People didn't want her because she was a Catholic, so they put Lady Jane Grey, who was a Protestant, on the throne. It's like a very tragic tale, and she became like kind of this famous martyr. Highly recommend Googling her story, but this is like a fanfic, magical realism version of her life. And I got invited to the premiere at Tribeca Film Festival by Instagram, which just felt so full circle. Like it just really felt like such a cool moment. Like this show that this book that helped spark so much of my life, because that's when I started reading more. After I read My Lady Jane, that's when I picked up all the Philippa Gregory Tudors books and I read all of those. And then that was when I had like graduated college then, and I was commuting to the city 2 hours each way every day. And I read through all of those books first, and then I was doing thrillers, and that is like just literally what sparked like my love of reading in adulthood. And then a few months later, in that September, is when I made K Red What. So just like that was kind of the book that sparked not even the book stuff in my life, but also introduced me to the Tudors. And we all know now how much I love the Tudors and Tudor history, and like travel to England to go see all this Tudor historical thing. So it was just very cool. And the first episode of the show is so, so good. I was in it right away and I was like, I cannot wait to continue watching this. So that's what I watched. I went to that. I also went to Gallery Books, invited me to a cool event at Bibliotech, which is this like wine bar, bookstore slash wine bar in Soho. And it was like in the wine cellar that they have downstairs, which was really cool. And it's fun to like go to these events and I just run into people that I know from Instagram and I like see at these events. And that was probably my last one for the summer. Because I'm not in the city, and also publishing like kind of like slows down in the summer. If anyone is listening and wants to invite me to a cool event, I will come back to the city for it. But that felt like my last one for a while. And it was fun. And then I just like spent time with like my friends in the city, since I'm gonna, as my friend Steph, who's potentially listening to this, she is Read in Style on Bookstagram, said before I retired to Long Island for the summer. And yeah, and then even when I was home, we did Father's Day, and then I had like one of my best friend's bridal showers and grad parties. And then my cousin graduated high school, so I went to her graduation, and just like lots of family stuff. Summer is like a big family time for me, also because I'm like living with my mom, which has like, it's only been not even a week of it being full time, and I'm enjoying it. Obviously, I'm sure we will bicker, but it's been nice. We'll like sit at night and watch our shows. Last night we started watching the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders documentary on Netflix, and we were like, we'll watch one episode, and then we're like, it ended, and we're like, well, we have to watch another, and then it ended, and we're like, okay, we have to watch another. And we are at the time of recording, we've only watched the first three. We have four more. I am like loving it way more than I thought that I would. I was a cheerleader growing up. Their type of cheerleading, though, they're literally dancers, so it is completely different. But I obviously, because I was a cheerleader, and also my dad and my brother are Cowboys fans, which being from New York, it is what it is. So Dallas Cowboys and Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders were like always a big thing in my life growing up. So I'm just like really, really enjoying the show. I have been listening to Gracie Abrams. I'm obsessed with that album. And I've been like cruising through audiobooks. I'm going to talk about my June audiobook on this episode, obviously, but I'm almost done with my July audiobook that I started when I finished that one. So you'll hear about that in next month's wrap up. But I could ramble more about how I'm having like a nice, relaxing summer so far, but we have 30 books to talk about. So I think it's time to just jump into it. So the first book I read was Just Kids by Patti Smith. I gave this 4 stars, and I know what you're thinking. She read this book because you're not Dylan Thomas. I'm not Patti Smith. This ain't the Chelsea Hotel. We're modern idiots. But this book was on my TBR before the Torture Poets Department came out, because it was one of my 24 and 24 books. I was honestly kind of embarrassed that I had never read it, because it's so New York music. I love that whole scene. I'm fascinated with the history of the Chelsea Hotel. So I finally picked this up, and then it was just kind of more fun being able to sing the song in my head, So this is Patti Smith's memoir about her time when she moved to New York, living in the Chelsea Hotel, her relationship with this photographer, I think his name was Robert, really enjoyed this more than I thought that I would. I like, is this embarrassing to admit? I don't know. I didn't know much about Patti Smith. So I was like, okay, what am I picking up here? But really wild story, but so beautifully written. It is so New York. Just like really, really love that. I understand why everybody's obsessed with it. I gave that 4 stars. Next, I read The Queen's Faithful Companion by Eliza Knight. So this is a biographical fiction about Queen Elizabeth II, but it's like told through the lens of her corgis and her love of dogs. So there are 3 perspectives in the book. We have Elizabeth, we meet her as a princess. It starts when Elizabeth is 18. On her 18th birthday, her dad, King George, gifted her her first corgi, Susan, and that is something that actually happened. Then we have the perspective of Susan, the corgi, which I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. Like, the heck is going to happen here? It reminded me a little bit of Lessons in Chemistry with, I think the dog's name was Monday. I liked it. Like, the execution, it worked. And then the third perspective is this character, Hannah, who is fictional, and she works as like the master of the Queen's corgi. So she's basically in charge of taking care of the dogs. And she has this friendship with Elizabeth because they knew each other their whole lives since her dad was a groundskeeper at Windsor Castle. So we basically follow from then Princess Elizabeth's 18th birthday through to Susan, the corgi's death, which I believe was like 70s. Like there's no Diana, and it's all focused solely on the Queen. And I just really I love reading and learning about the Queen. Like, what a woman, what a fascinating story. I especially really love reading about her early life. So if you loved people who preferred the early seasons of The Crown, like I'm right there with you for many reasons. But I love reading about her falling in love with Philip and her and Philip in their early years. And we see her as a princess, then we see her become a wife, and then we see her become a mother, and then we see her become queen. And it was really interesting. Obviously, like one of the perspectives is her dog, so there's the like lens of that, but it's like basically learning about the Queen's life through just like more of a focus on how much she loves her dogs. But I really enjoyed it. I think if you're looking for if you want to learn more about Queen Elizabeth, then this is like a great avenue to do that. The next book I read is The Main Character by Jacqueline Goldis. I gave this 3 stars, and honestly, at this point, I think I just have to stop with this author, but also, you know me, and I say that all the time, and I don't. So she also wrote the book The Chateau, which I read last year. I remember vividly where I was when I was starting it because I was flying home from Disney, and we were like delayed in the Orlando airport, sitting at a Chili's, and I started this up on my Kindle. And I like that one. I liked that one more than this one, and I didn't even really love that one. That one, like the twist at the end really got me. So this one though, first of all, it has a great cover, but it's a modern twist on the Orient Express. So the main girl is Rory, and she just served as the main character for this famous author. So basically what this author does is take people from real life, like you can like apply to be her main character, and she is like a super 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 famous author. Everybody knows who she is, and she will basically, like, Rory sat with her over the course of a few months. She was living in Italy at the time because that's where the author is based, and she, like, it's like therapy basically, like what she goes into. And then the author will interview friends and family to like get a better sense of Rory, and then she takes her actual life story as the inspiration for a thriller. So just like wild, interesting concepts right there. So, as a thank you for serving as the main character, the author sets her up on this like luxurious European train trip, like the Orient Express. And she gets there and she's shocked to find her brother, her best friend, and her ex fiance. And Rory has issues with all 3 of them right now. So, along the course of this train ride, things start coming to light. We also know in the very, very beginning that someone dies on the train. So, it like, I loved the premise, and the family drama specifically was so good, and that is what made me keep reading this book, because this, like, she has issues with the best friend Caroline, issues with the ex-fiance, whatever, but like her stuff with her brother was so wild, and that was kind of really the main thing like propelling the story forward was this family drama, and there's a bit of a mystery in the family. Other than that, like the execution kind of fell flat for me, and this is how I felt about the chateau as well. Like they're way too long, and there's just so much there's so much text in this book that felt so unnecessary, and I would feel my eyes starting to like glaze over paragraphs, just like waiting to catch like the one important tidbit in like a few pages. Like it was just, and it just thing a lot of things could have been cut, and like because I got like that, like I was getting frustrated, and I was like, I just can't wait for this to end, because there were such great twists and the plot was so interesting, but I was like, I just needed to know what happened, and that's why I finished it. I gave it 3 stars. Like honestly, like when I wish that I would DNF'd, usually I'll do a 2-star, but um there were great twists, and the mystery is what kept me going, but just overall didn't really work for me. The next book that I read was Summer Fridays by Suzanne Rindell, and this was a 5-star read for me, and I covered this in full a few weeks ago on the episode titled Recent 5-Star Read. So for the sake of time and the fact that there are 30 books on this episode, I'm not going to go in depth, but this is basically a romance book that doesn't feel like a romance, and I don't know how to explain it further than that. It takes place in 1999 in New York. It is so New York. I loved this so much. I couldn't put it down. I've still been thinking about it since I read it in the beginning of the month. Just like really, really amazing book. Kara, what 5-star read? The next book I read is Lost and Lassoed by Lila Sage. This is the 3rd book in the Done and Dusted series. This does not come out until November. I am sorry. I just could not wait. And so I read it when I wanted to. This is about Gus and Teddy, which I think is a story that like I was waiting for after Done and Dusted. I think a lot of people were. So if you have read Done and Dusted and Swift and Saddled, you will not be disappointed with this one. It is everything we have come to love from Lila Sage. If you're not familiar with her, she writes this cowboy romance series that I picked up the first one, Done and Dusted, and was like, this is going to be ridiculous. I probably won't like it. And I was fucking obsessed. It is now on my favorite shelf. I loved it so much. I gave that one 5 stars. The following 2 were 4 stars. Not that because they're any less good as Done and Dusted. I think Done and Dusted just will always be a little bit more special to me because it got me just so obsessed with this world. But I really loved this. So good. Get ready for November. I gave that 4 stars. Next, I read Real Americans by Rachel Kong. I covered this in full on last week's episode, so go to that if you want to hear my full thoughts about it. I gave this 4 stars. It is so hard to talk about, but this is another kind of, is turn of the century the correct term for saying into 2000, or that's like turn of the millennium? Fun fact about me, this is so embarrassing that I'm admitting this so publicly, but here we go. I'm not good. Like, what century are we in? I don't know. Is it the 21st century? But then it's like Xenon, 21st century girl. Or like, I just think of like Phil of the Future. Like, it hurts my brain. Like, it's 18th century. Why isn't that the 1800s? I think like 18th century is the 1700s. And that's just crazy. It should just be like 18th century, 1800s. I don't know. It hurts my brain to think about, so I'm going to stop talking about it, and that's so embarrassing for me to admit. But fun fact about me. Another fun fact, like, I'm just going to stop. It's just, oh no, I feel like I have to tell you, is that I don't know how to tie my shoes. I have to do bunny ears as an almost 30-year-old woman, and that's enough embarrassing fun facts about me. The next book I read is The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. I loved this. I gave it 4 stars. I've seen it described as like Succession meets White Lotus, and I've only made it 20 minutes through an episode of Succession. Don't come for me. It's just not for me. But White Lotus vibes, yes. So this is such a fun take on my favorite romance trope, fake dating. Our main girl is Anna, and back in the day in college, she married this guy, West, because they could both like live in like this certain type of student housing. Didn't really fully understand it, but like they were basically just roommates, and then like legally they were married. But we end up finding out that West is from this super, super, super rich family. They run like one of the biggest grocery store chains in America, and he hates his family though, and he would always use the excuse of his wife to get out of things. But now his sister's getting married and he has to go, and they think that he is literally married. So it's years later, and he shows back up at Anna's door, and it turns out that there's still married. She thought they were divorced, but they're not. And she is like unemployed. She really needs money because her dad's sick. So she agrees to go and like pretend to be his wife for this week long trip on, I think it was like Bora Bora, like this like ridiculous luxury island. And his family is insane though. Like, I love reading about rich people behaving badly, and these people were like horrible. But there's also like, I just love reading about rich people basically, because like the clothes and like the glamour of everything, and then like they're horrible people. So obviously you can guess what happens. Fake dating is my favorite trope for a reason, but it was just so much fun. It is so atmospheric. I felt like I was on this island with them. It's funny. It's just like typical Christina Lauren vibes, which is just like top tier romance. I loved this so much. I purposely saved it to read by the pool just so I could like feel like I was on the island a little bit. And I'm glad that I did that. It's so, so good. I gave that 4 stars. The next book I read is Husbands and Lovers by Beatrice Williams. So I am a huge fan of Beatrice Williams' historical fiction. She is one of my favorite historical fiction authors. Her books are, a lot of them are connected. If you scroll down to a year ago on my feed, there is a bit of a guide that I have put together. But I would say that this one can be read as a standalone. But if you want to be a perfectionist, I would read this after The Summer Wives, which, fun fact, was my first Beatrice Williams book, and then do The Beach at Summerley, which is her book that came out last year, and then do this. But this one, like, I only say that because of the setting. So this one, we are back on Winthrop Island, which is this fictional island Beatrice created. It gives like Cape Cod, Nantucket vibes. And we have 3 different timelines, but we only follow 2 women. It's a little bit confusing. So in the current day, we are following main girl Mallory, and she is a single mother, and she learns that the love of her life, the father of her child, I forgot his name, obviously, but I did really love him. He is a super famous musician, and he is getting married on Winthrop Island, and they end up running into each other, and sparks fly. And then we also have a timeline from 2008 when we watch them, their love affair first happen, and obviously she gets pregnant because we know that they have a child in the current timeline. Also in the current timeline, though, Mallory and her sister learned that their mother, who has recently passed away, was adopted. So they start looking into who their grandparents really are. And this is when we go back in time, and we are in Cairo in 1952, where our main girl is Hannah, and she is a diplomat's wife with like a wild past. And I loved this. I love reading about, like, they're at the Shepherd's Hotel, which is this famous hotel where like the rich and famous would stay in Cairo. And it's also like a post World War II, they're leading up to like a revolution where they're throwing out British rule, and she's there as a diplomat's wife. So there's just like, she's like in this pressure cooker, and she falls in love with a man who works at the hotel who is Egyptian, and it's just like so wild and fascinating to read. I like all through, you're in like this wild Egyptian timeline, and I was so into it. And then I also was like so invested in Mallory's relationship with the musician, and then so it was so cute to get to see them like when they first fell in love. And then in the modern timeline, when he's like, they're figuring out why they broke up, obviously it was like a big dramatic thing, he finds out he has a son, and like watching them connect, and like there's just so much going on here. But Beatrice's writing style is so special, and she just pulled this off so well, and the way that all the timelines wove together was just so good. I loved it. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read Anna Bright is Hiding Something by Susie Orman Schnall. I also gave this 4 stars. So Susie came on my radar a few years ago when I read We Came Here to Shine, which is historical fiction about the New York World's Fair. Another fun fact about me is that I'm fascinated by World's Fair, specifically the New York one, because whenever I drive into or from the city, I pass the site of the World's Fair, and there are these things that they put up which were like, they look like flying saucers kind of, and they just like left them there. And it's so wild to me that for almost 100 years, because this World's Fair took place in the 40s, like this relic is just still there, and it like makes me sad. And then whenever I drive by it, then I always think of like Captain America, and also It's a Small World, because the ride in Disney, It's a Small World, was literally built for this World's Fair, and they put it up there, and then they eventually moved it into the parks. And I just like, I'm fascinated with World's Fairs, period. I think that they're so interesting, and like there's so many wild stories that come out about all of them. But like I said, specifically this New York one, and I'm always like, oh, I wonder if any of my ancestors went to the World's Fair. There's like no one alive that I can ask anymore, but I would have gone. Seems so cool. I would have been there. But yeah, so that book is so good. It's about that World's Fair. We follow a girl who's like in the, what are they called? Like the synchronized swimmers, but there was like a fancier name for it. So I that's how she came on my radar. Huge fan of that book and of her. Then last year I was at an event for Fiona Davis's new release. This is when The Spectacular came out, and Susie was the one interviewing her, and she was asked what she's working on, and she said that she's like, I'm doing something completely different because after watching the show, why did I just forget the name of the show? The Dropout, and reading Bad Blood about Elizabeth Holmes, she got inspired. So this is basically like a fanfic, well, not fanfic. It's like kind of like a retelling of the Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos story. And right away I was like, sign me the fuck up, because I was obsessed with the show The Dropout, and then therefore Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, and the fact that Elizabeth Holmes is currently in jail with Jen Shaw. Like, all roads lead to Bravo. So in this book, there's two main characters, and the Elizabeth Holmes character is Anna Bright, and she has developed quotes, this thing that like gets implanted in your eye, and it's basically, if you remember Ned's Classified School Survival Guide, how the guy had those like glasses that could just like and like analyze everything. It's like you could do that in just like in your eye, and it's not ready yet, obviously, because it's based on Theranos. So no one knows that, though. In the beginning of the book, we meet Jamie, who is a reporter, and she has to fill in for her boss and interview Anna like on stage at an event. And Anna's really impressed with her, so she grants her an interview. And then she starts like she's literally like, come on my jet to LA and we'll do the interview from New York to LA. And then she starts like really flaking out on it, and Jamie starts looking into things, and you can figure out what happened. So then we follow her trying to break this story while also following Anna as like things start falling apart. Couldn't put it down. So interesting. Even when you know where it's going, it's still just like so wild. And it doesn't match Elizabeth Holmes exactly. Like it matches it in the sense that like you know what's going to happen, but there are things that are so unique to the story, twists and turns, things with Jamie the reporter's life that were very interesting. I just like loved it. Can't recommend more. Next, I read A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston. Ashley Poston is one of my favorite romance authors. This is the first book of hers I haven't given 5 stars. I gave it 4 though. It just didn't hit as hard for me as The Dead Romantics and 7 Years Slip, but I still enjoyed it. The premise is so interesting. So all of her romance novels have this, they are magical realism. And in this one, our main girl, Eileen, she basically gets lost on a road trip and ends up in the world of her favorite romance book. So her and her best friend joined this like online happily ever after book club a few years ago, and they have this annual tradition where they go on like a reading retreat in upstate New York, and like sign me up, and they just bring a bunch of books and like snacks and drinks, and like they spend the whole weekend there. And this year her life is falling apart. Like her and her fiance have broken up. She's like not really obsessed with her career. She's just feeling very lost, and she's looking forward to this trip more than ever, but no one can go. So she decides she's going to go alone. So she's from Atlanta, and she like drives all the way up. And once she hits like Hudson Valley, her car starts acting up, and she like almost runs this guy over in the road, and she ends up in this small town, and she starts recognizing it, and she realizes that she is literally in the town Aloriton, where all of her favorite romance books take place. But here's the thing with this. So like there's like 4 books out, and also like all the characters in the books are there. Like she's literally like got plopped into the world. So there's 4 books out, and or 3 or 4 out. and there's supposed to be another one, but the author died before it could be finished. So the fandom and everyone is just like, they're left with all of these answers. It was going to be the last book in the series, and these books are like her whole life. She's reread them a million times. She knows everything by heart. So she's so depressed, and all of a sudden she's in this world of her favorite books, and she's just like obsessed. And it turns out that the guy that she ran over, I forgot his name, and it's not listed on Goodreads. So whatever. The guy that she almost ran over, he's not in the book series. So she is like, oh, he is probably the book boyfriend for the last book that we haven't read yet. So she assumes that this author that she loves and trusted wrote him in, and he owns the bookstore, and she ends up staying above the bookstore, and she like really immerses herself in the book. But that in itself is like so interesting. But then it was also really interesting because you see what happens after the happily ever after. And some of the couples that she's obsessed with are like having some issues, and she's like seeing them as real people versus characters in a book. And eventually then she realizes that like her being there is like changing some of the things and whatever. It's like this whole drama, and her and the bookstore guy fall in love, obviously, and so much happens, and I'm just going to stop saying it there. But this really was like a love letter to books, specifically the romance genre. And I thought that the passage on happily ever afters, or the message on happily ever afters and everything, was just so interesting. She always like, she includes grief in this book as well. Ashley just has a way of writing about grief that like really kills me. I thought this was really fun and unique. My only gripe with it was that I wasn't really obsessed with our main couple. I just like didn't really get the chemistry and the connection, and I was more interested in like everything else. And that missing for me is like what made this a 4-star read rather than a 5. But like, it's still so good. Like, I think you should still pick it up. I kind of just like was a little let down like the romance part I wasn't obsessed with, but I was obsessed with everything else. The next book I read is The Ministry of Time by Kellyanne Bradley. I gave this 4 stars, and I covered this in full on last week's episode, so you can go over there to listen to that. And then you can also go over there to listen to me talk about the next book I read, which is The Briar Club by Kate Quinn. I gave this 5 stars. This comes out, I think, next week. It's early July. I love this so fucking much. When I get my hands on a physical copy, it's going on my favorite shelf. This is historical fiction that takes place in the 50s in Washington, D.C. and covers like so freaking many things about history. Like, just go to last week's episode and hear me gush about it. Next, I read Revelation, which is another book in my private series reread. I gave this 4 stars. Oh, actually, I read that before the Briar Club, so whatever. Okay, here we go. Next, I read Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, and I gave this 3 stars, and I'm officially never reading another Abby Jimenez book again. And I know some of you listening are like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, those are the best books. And I hope some of you are agreeing with me. I do not understand all of the hype. Like, I can't. So last year I read Part of Your World, and I liked it, but I wasn't obsessed. And I thought it was way, way, way too long. And then after that, I was like, okay, I wasn't obsessed. Like, I don't need to continue the series. But then Just for the Summer came out, and the cover got me, and everyone on Bookstagram was obsessed with it. Like, it seemed like Emily Henry level obsession with these books. So I was like, I had FOMO. I'm only human. So I was like, okay, I want to read it. But then on Goodreads, it was like, that was number 3. So I was like, well, if I already read the first one, I should read yours truly. So then I picked that one up, and I talked about this on last month's wrap up, but like, way too fucking long. Like, why are all of these books, which, okay, maybe it's hypocritical because Summer Fridays, I gave a 5 stars this year and this month, and that was also a 400-page romance. But like, Abby Jimenez's books do not need to be 400 pages. Like, it just goes on for so long, and it starts to make me, all 3 books I started off liking, and then it's just like something happens that like I start actively disliking it. This one I liked the most out of the 3, and I still just liked it. I didn't love it, and I'm just done. I liked the guy. I liked all the family drama. It was fine. Also, fun fact for people not from Minnesota like me. So when I finished reading this, I got a DM from somebody, and that was like, I'm from Minnesota, and I love that she includes her donut shop. And I was like, I had no idea what this person was talking about. And I just like was in the middle of doing something when I opened it, and I just like forgot to inquire further. So I was like, okay, whatever. And then, and I do remember them like mentioning donuts in this book. And then another person messaged me and was like, I'm from Minnesota and I hate that she always pushes her donut shop. And I was like, wait, does she actually have a donut shop? Abby Jimenez actually owns a donut shop and she just like slips it in her books. Fun fact for people not from Minnesota. I'm just like, I'm done. And I felt like a pet peeve of mine on Bookstagram is when people just like keep reading books by authors knowing that they don't like them. And I did do that with this one, but I was on a mission because I thought I would like this one and I didn't. And I'm done. So we're moving on. Next, I read The Wedding Dress Sewing Circle by Jennifer Ryan. I gave this 2 stars. I should have DNF'd it, but I really, really loved her last one that now I can't think of the title, the one that just came out. So I thought it would get better, and it just didn't really do it for me. This is a World War II historical fiction that takes place in a small town, gives Downton Abbey vibes. We follow 2 people from like the family that own the castle on the estate and like oversee the village. Then some of the villagers, it was just kind of boring. I don't really feel like something anymore. All right, we got some bangers coming up. So next I read Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. And like this woman just does not ever fucking miss. So I gave this 4 stars. Fun fact, I've only given The Love Hypothesis 5 stars. I've given all of her other books 4 stars, just in case you were wondering. So our main girl in this book is Rue, and we meet her as she is like showing up. Sorry if you're watching, I feel like I think I have something in my eye, and that's why I keep rubbing my eye. She shows up at a bar to like, because she's on the prowl for a hookup because she like uses this hookup app where it's like they literally just hook up and that's it. And she had matched with this guy on the app that night, and she gets there, but when she gets there, she gets like accosted by this guy from her past who turns out to be her brother. We find that out pretty quickly, but the guy from the app shows up as this is happening. His name is Eli. He becomes very important to the story, and he is like, whoa, what's going on here? And like knight in shining armors her, and she's kind of like, I didn't need you to do that, but he is like super protective, which is just like a fun thing I'm into. So I was like, okay, this is cute. And he drives her home, and then she's like, I'm never going to see him again. The next day she gets to work. So since it's Ali Hazelwood, there's a science element. She's a biomechanical food engineer, which is probably not a real title, but that's what the vibe I got from it. And she like made this thing that makes food stay fresher longer. And her company, though, is she shows up to work that day and she finds out that her company is being essentially bought, because this is where like I don't understand any of the finance things from this, but the founder, who is like Rue's best friend, like defaulted on a loan or something. So this investment firm that Eli and his best friends founded like bought the loan. So now they're basically like they own the majority of the company, and there's like this deadline for the founder to like save it, like whatever. So she's like, oh my god, like that's the guy from last night, and now he's here to like ruin my life and like my job and this company that I love. And yeah, so obviously like they already had intense sexual chemistry, and that like continues to be a thing. So then they do that thing where they're like, let's just fuck and like see if we get it out of our systems, and then it's Ali Hazelwood, so we can imagine what happens from there. But okay, so what I loved about this book is I'm getting so flustered thinking about some of the scenes in this book. This book is so spicy, like the spiciest Ali Hazelwood, which I really feel like is saying something, because after reading chapter 16 of The Love Hypothesis, I was scared to leave my bedroom. I was like, no one look at me. I was reading this in public and I was like, oh my god, nobody look at me. It's spicy. And I loved Eli, which just like made it all the more fun. Like I want to marry him. So what I loved though also about this book, like I'm not a science girl, I think we can tell. I'm also not a finance girl, but it was more corporate drama than science drama. And I love her science books too. I feel like I always walk away learning something. I was watching Oppenheimer and I was like, I understand this because of love theoretically. But I also really liked that there's still a science element to this, but like the corporate political espionage drama was like really fun and interesting and kind of more relatable, just as someone who like works in corporate America, and like I've worked at startups for my whole career. So like that felt very like similar. I've never gone through this situation, but just like I felt like I understood it a little bit more. Eli is like a man in finance, is 6'5", trust fund, blue eyes. So obsessed right away. But they both have really interesting family dynamics that like play a huge role in their relationship. And I was really, really into that. And I loved both characters separately. I love them together. It's Allie Hazelwood. Like, this woman just keeps giving us 2 books a year and they are all bangers. Like, no one is doing it like her. Obsessed, 4 stars. Okay, the next book I read, get ready, write this one down. It comes out on October 1st, is Fang Fiction by Kate Stamen London. So she wrote One to Watch, which I read back in like 2020, and I was obsessed with it. And I didn't realize that she had another book coming out until I was invited to go to the Dial Delights event last in May. And I got to hear her talk with a bunch of other authors, including Lila Sage, and I got a copy of this book and I was like, I cannot wait until October. Like, I just have to read it now. And I'm so glad that I did. Although this is like such a good Halloween book. Remember a few weeks ago when I was like, where are all of my vampire books? Well, like, the universe is just answering, because this is a perfect vampire book. Like, my dream situation happened to the main girl, Tess. So in this book, our main girl is Tess, and she is obsessed with this book series, Blood Feud. And it's like if Twilight met the Vampire Diaries, kind of, this book series. And I know that the Vampire Diaries were books, but like, those don't count. So like, that is like the level of like obsession. Like, think of like the fandoms of both, and like people are just obsessed with these books. And like, Tess meets her college best friend because of these books, and it's like their whole personalities and like the whole world of the book sounds like so much fun. And it's basically, there's like this group of vampires that are trapped on the Isle, which is a mythical version of Manhattan. So it was very fun to be reading this in the city, aka on the Isle. So Tess, when we meet her, she, like I said, she like met her best friend in college because of these books. She's a student at Columbia, and major content for this morning because she is a victim of sexual assault. And we don't see that play out in the book, but that changes like the trajectory of her life. And she drops out of school, just like kind of ghosts all of her friends because it was someone in her department who assaulted her and she just can't be around it. And she was just like, understandably, like, not okay. So it's a few years later since that, and she's working as a night manager in a hotel. And one day, and also, okay, sorry, I'm like all over the place because there's just so much to say about this, but this world of Blood Feud is like it's like one of the biggest pop culture things, right? And there's also all of these theories online that it's real. And then people will like the main two of the main characters are these twins. It's like Octavia and I forgot the guy's name, but people like spotted them in photos like throughout the last like 200 years. And Tess wrote like this essay on like BuzzFeed or something about like with all the evidence of why she thinks it's real. But the way that Kate Stamen London wrote this book, it's similar to what she did with One to Watch, and it is what made it just like added this extra layer of specialness. Because so you'll open up a chapter and it'll have like podcast transcripts of people talking about the books, and then it'll have actual chapters from the Blood Feud book. So you're getting to see like the lore of the world. And now I'm like, please write the Blood Feud books. I need to read them. And then it'll have like tweets and like social media things. And like, I love that she does this, because it's just when it was the same thing with One to Watch, which is like about a bachelor type show. And it's like when it is this like huge pop culture moment, that's how you consume it. It's not just from like watching the show, or in this case, reading the book. So you get all of these added things and it just makes it so much more special. So anyway, Tess is at work one night and Octavia, the main vampire, shows up there. And she's like, she tracked Tess down because she read her BuzzFeed article and she basically got like kicked off the Isle. She doesn't know how. Now she's trapped back in the real world with none of her powers. And she asks Tess to go to the Isle to let her brother know like where she is. And so much happens. I'm not going to say anything else to give anything away, but this was so good. So unique. Like, just imagine waking up in Mystic Falls is like a dream. So like, imagine that. Or like in Forks, like I feel like we all dreamed about that when we were so obsessed with these things as teenagers. And like, I would still happily wake up at the Salvatore boarding house. So like, So good. Such an interesting premise. And the execution was so good. It is so much fun, but then it's also like adventure and so good. I loved it so much. It's out October 1st. The next book I read is Queen Victoria's Matchmaking by Deborah Cadbury. I gave this 4 stars. This was my audiobook for June that I freaking flew through. So it's nonfiction, and it is about Queen Victoria's grandchildren and how Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, had this plan to like basically get for them to like it didn't sound as sinister as how it sounds when I'm saying this, but to like take over the thrones of everywhere in Europe by like having their children and grandchildren intermarry into every royal family in Europe, and it ends up like going over to Russia too. And like that is what happens. Like if you start looking into family trees of like every monarchy, like one of Victoria's children or grandchildren are bound to pop up. I love the way that this was told. It was so interesting. I learned a lot of new things from it, but I also was like very proud that I already knew a lot. So I was like, okay, my like little armchair historian efforts are paying off. Really great read if you're interested in like all of these royal historical fictions that I talk about. Like I've talked about the Sisters Romanov, which is about the Hesse sisters, and the Hesse sisters are heavily featured in this. And Victoria's own daughter, well, a lot of her daughters, but her daughter Victoria is like heavily featured in this, and it goes through like Victorian times and then into like World War One and like so much drama, so much Queen Victoria family drama within World War One. Really good. I really enjoyed it. The next book I read is Darling Girls by Sally Hepworth, and I have an entire episode talking about this. So you can go listen to the June book club episode if you want to hear my thoughts, but I gave that 4 stars. Next, I read Paradise Lost by Kate Bryan. This is another one of my private series reread. I gave that 4 stars. This was the first one when they were in St. Bart's, and I like could vividly remember the first time I read it because that's the first time I learned about St. Bart's. So interesting to like read the series now and like know more just from me being more like cultured, aka consuming more pop culture and media about rich people. Speaking of the Tudors, the next book I read is Anna of Cleve, The Princess and the Portrait by Alison Ware. This is my continuation of her 6 Tudor Queen series. I gave this 4 stars. Anne of Cleves is probably my favorite changes all the time, but like I really like Anne of Cleves. If you don't know where she ranks in Henry VIII's wives, she was the 4th wife who was divorced and, in my opinion, got off the best out of all of them. Her story is basically that he like saw her painting and decided that he didn't like her and divorced her, and then they said that they were brother and sister, and she had like a pretty great life until she died very young of what's presumed to be breast cancer. So she had like a pretty tragic death, but she got off the best out of a lot of his wives. This one, we meet her as a young girl, and then we follow her whole life through her death. So we see her coming over from Germany to England and her marriage with Henry, the divorce afterwards. I really liked all of it. She did, and she said in the author's note that she like made up this whole side plot. Usually that would bother me because I read books like this to learn, but I think because I already knew so much of the true story, it just kind of like made it fun, and it didn't really bother me. And like she explained everything, and she explained why she included that, and it was like because of I'm being so vague because I don't want to spoil it, but I was like, Henry, that bastard, Henry VIII, had like said some things in letters that inspired this side plot that was fun to read. 4 stars. Next, I read Suspicion, which is another book in my private reread. I gave it 4 stars, and now I am taking a break from my private reread until September when I'm back in the city. I think I have like 4 left. So that's why I read so many. I read 3 in June. I usually do 1 or 2 a month, but I was like, okay, I'm not gonna read them in July and August. So let me just like bulk up in June. Next, I read Twice Tempted by a Rogue by Tessa Dare. I gave this 2 stars. I should have DNF'd it. It's a historical romance that just like I didn't like it. It was like the guy like comes back to town and it's like, I'm gonna marry you, and then that's it. And I don't know, just like really didn't work for me. And I would have DNF'd it, but I took my June wrap-up pick before I left the city, and this book was in it. And I'm a perfectionist, so I had to finish it because it was in that book. The next in that picture, the next book I read is Silence for the Dead by Simone St. James. I gave this 3 stars. I love Simone St. James. I'm a huge fan of her books. This is like one of, if not her first book, and they re-released it after she's gotten really popular. So I picked it up. It's not my favorite. I only gave it 3 stars, but you can see that like the beginnings of her brilliance, in my opinion, how it like started here. And then it's just like, okay, now like she's grown into this amazing author. The premise of this is really interesting. So it is 1919, and our main girl takes a job as a nurse in this like home for, basically it's for World War I veterans who are suffering from PTSD, but they are saying that these guys are crazy, and also the house is haunted. And so basically what happens is that these vets are literally being haunted, but because they have PTSD and all the nurses and the doctors are just like, they're crazy, and like so no one believes them, which I think is a really interesting premise, especially if you read up about how, I mean, all veterans, I think, but like specifically those guys in World War I witnessed things that like nobody had ever seen up until that point. And then to come back into like such a strict and kind of Victorian still society, like it was just like sad, you know? So I got a little boring at times, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like you could just see that like she's grown so much as a writer since this one. Next, I read When You Get the Chance by Emma Lord. I gave this 3 stars. Years ago, one of my followers recommended this book to me, and I finally picked it up. And this is a YA novel about this girl, Millie, who basically runs her own Mamma Mia. So she's raised by her single dad. She never knew who her mom was. Her and her friends find her dad's live journal and track it down to 3 women, and she gets to know the 3 of them over the course of a summer. So Mamma Mia, obviously you guys know I love Mamma Mia. My birthday party that's coming up at the end of July is Mamma Mia themed. So that was fun. All the Mamma Mia references were fun. It was cute, like nothing super special. Yeah. The next book I read is The Book of Lost Friends by Lisa Wingate. I gave this 3 stars. So I always talk about Lisa's book, Before We Were Yours. I've had this one forever and just didn't pick it up for some reason. And then like I didn't like it. So maybe that's why. This was fine, but like very different from how it was described. So basically, this real life historical thing was the Book of Lost Friends. And when slavery was abolished, former slaves would write letters and like submit them to newspapers looking for their lost friends, basically for their family. So they would say like, my name is whatever, I lived here, I was born here, then I was sold to this person and I moved here, and this is my mother's name and these are my siblings' names, like you can find me here. And so when the book, there's 2 timelines, 1875 and 1987. So in 1875, we're following Hanny, who is a former slave, and she was one of the slaves who basically got stuck, like still living on the plantation, but then like being paid like barely any money. And she like goes off on this wild adventure with the daughters of the owner of the plantation, and it was like honestly kind of confusing why she was there. And I thought that the book was going to be about her finding her lost friends, which like obviously does come to play a role in it, but it's really her like on this journey back to Texas where she thinks her family is, and she learns about the Book of Lost Friends and people she meets along the way. She learns how to write so she could like write it down and compile a book, which like all of that though doesn't really happen till the end. Like the bulk of her portion is about her being on this journey, which I just like didn't fully understand. Then in 1987, our main girl is Benny, and she's just moved to this town in Louisiana, the same town that Hanny was from. And she takes a job at this school where like the town is so poor, the kids are so poor and not interested in school. And in order to try to get them involved in their education, she starts teaching them about local history, and she eventually learns about Hanny, and then it all kind of like crosses over from there. Not fully what I expected, like I said, and some parts were just kind of boring, but yeah, I gave it 3 stars. Next, I literally just finished this, Under Your Spell by Laura Wood. I gave it 4 stars. Fucking obsessed with it, and I actually can't believe I'm sure people are posting about it, but I have never seen anybody post about this. So this is a romance book. Our main girl is Clementine. She goes by Clemmy, and She is the daughter of a very famous musician who, like, he gave like Mick Jagger, Keith Richards vibes, who he like got 3 women pregnant at the same time. So her and her 2 sisters are like basically triplets, are all born within 3 months. And then their moms like raised them together. And her dad has been like super absent and like really just an asshole. And then when she was a teenager, she had a really traumatic relationship with the musician. So she's like completely written off musicians, like she doesn't even listen to music. And then the beginning of the book, their dad's manager, who is really like an uncle to them, passes away. So she goes to the funeral and her dad's there, and it's like very overwhelming. So she goes upstairs to her childhood bedroom and she sees this hot guy in there, and they end up having like this wild one night stand. Like she was like, best night of my life. And then doesn't see or hear from him again. Then like a month later, her sister, who both of her sisters work in music, her one sister who's like a label exec, at her birthday party, she was like, I have a job for you. I need you to, she's like, one of my musicians, Theo Elliott. He's like, I pictured him as Harry Styles, honestly. And it sounded like he was supposed to be like Harry, but he was late 30s. So like an older Harry. She's like, he is so behind on his album that like we're sending him up to their grandparents' cottage in Northumberland for 6 weeks to write the album. And we need someone to babysit him. And like Clemmy, her fiance or her 4-year boyfriend just dumped her. She hates her job. Like she's a mess. So she goes, but it turns out that Theo is the guy she had the crazy one night stand with. So now they're locked in this cottage for 6 weeks while he's trying to write his album. And I love this so much. Like you can guess what happens. The romance was so good. I am obsessed with Theo. Like perfect book boyfriend. And then all of her family stuff was so interesting. Conversations about like fame were very interesting. Just like, I guess this would fall into like that Hollywood romance trope that I obviously love, but like I love that it was a musician. And I also love though that it wasn't super overly about his music, which I know maybe sounds weird, but like it's not until the end when like you see lyrics of songs he wrote about her. I think I find it a bit cringy than when the author's like inserting these love songs, but like I loved this so much. I was smiling so big. I did not want it to end. Just like so good. If you're looking for a new fun rom-com, like this is it. That's Under Your Spell by Laura Wood. And that is 30 reviews. And I feel like I just did that. I only took one pause for a drink of water. That felt like a marathon, honestly. But great month overall, great reading month. I hope you all had great months and great reading months. July, I just already know is going to be, I mentioned in the beginning, just a fun life month for me. I have so many fun reads planned. Our July book club pick is a really good one. It is Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. That episode will be out on August 1st. Get your thoughts to me by July 29th, I think, or 30th. I don't know, either one of those. And I just want to reiterate this, if anyone is still here, because my life is so busy in July, there may be a week where you have an author interview up instead of an episode. I'm trying to get episodes up every week, but around the time of my brother's wedding, it's going to be a little bit chaotic. So we'll see what happens. I appreciate you guys being understanding if I don't get to put out a full episode. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. Please make sure you're following, subscribe, whatever it's on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. Follow me on Instagram at Kayla. Follow the show at Professional Book Girl. Leave a rating and review. It would make me very happy. And I will see you next week. This episode is not over because I just finished recording, started working out, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't talk about the Saturday Mass books I read in June. And then I was like, I could just still put the episode out. But then I was like, that is false advertising if I said I'm going to be talking about 30 books and I only did 27. So weird. So basically when I do these monthly wrap-up episodes, I just pull up my Goodreads and go down the list because it has like the book and my rating and the author name and whatever. And for some reason, the Sarah J. Maas books I read are not showing up on Goodreads on my computer. They are on my phone. Like, how is Goodreads still such a horrible app? Okay, so 3 more book reviews, which I can barely say anything about because it's the last 3 in a series, but I finished the Throne of Glass series. I finished my reread. I did the tandem read for Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn, and this is the way to read this series. So when I first read these books 5 years ago in 2019, the tandem read wasn't a thing. Basically, if you are unfamiliar, book 5 of the series is Empire of Storms. Book 6 is also a part of the series still, but it's about a character that goes on a side quest. So Empire of Storms has this fucking wild ending, and then you have to read this giant book that like is just following this one character on the side quest, which is important to the story as a whole, but like it was so hard. I remember the first time I read it, I was like, I just wanted to finish that book because I just like I wanted to get back with like all of our friends, and I like wanted to pick up where it left off. So people have since put together this tandem read where you read them both at once. It basically is putting them together as one book. You can Google Tower of Dawn tandem read, and people broke up the chapters. Someone I went to high school with very kindly sent me the Kindle file, so I had it all ready like that. So it was like just reading one giant book. If you would like me to send you the Kindle file, just DM me and I will forward it to you via email. Doing the tandem read made me enjoy Tower of Dawn more because it just felt like it was all in one book, which is like how I feel like it should have been. It would have been like a 2,000 page book because both of those books are so long, but like it just made it so much better to get through. I did post about this. So like it took me 4 days to do the tandem read, which like is a big chunk. For me, that's a long time to be reading a book, although I was essentially reading 2 books. And it was so daunting. I think because on my Kindle, it was like 18 hours. And after 2 days, I was only down to 13 hours. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm never finishing this. But like, I got through it. I ended up enjoying it more. And then I read Kingdom of Ash, which is the last Throne of Glass book. I did that one in 2 days. And it was really funny to look back because I can see in Goodreads, the first time I read it, it took me 9 days. And this time it took me 2. So my reading speed, that just goes to show the more you read, the faster you read. Because how many books have I read since 2019? I loved Kingdom of Ash so much more this second time around. I think that I'll talk about Kingdom of Ash first, and then I'll do my thoughts on my Throne of Glass reread as a whole, spoiler free, obviously. But the first time I read Kingdom of Ash, it's the last book in this like epic series. And I was like, I just wanted to know what was going to happen. And I felt like I was so anxious to get to the end. Whereas this time I knew how it ended. So I was able to actually kind of like enjoy the ride and really savor these times with these characters that I love. And I loved Kingdom of Ash much more this time around. I still cried when I was done, even though I knew how it was going to end. And then as a whole, I'm really glad that I reread Throne of Glass. So many things. I forgot so many main plot points of the book. And, like ACOTAR and Crescent City are both pretty fresh in my mind because I reread both of them in December and January. So not that long ago. And just like connecting some dots, how some things weave together made me that was fun to like think about the other series in that way, and just like a really nice reminder. And I think now I can officially say though that ACOTAR is my favorite, and then Crescent City, and then Throne of Glass. But they're all amazing. Like I love all of them. I don't know if I will reread Throne of Glass again. Like never say never, especially with Sarah J Maas, because like who knows, maybe one day I will like need to for a refresher. But you can just see like how much she's grown as a writer from this to ACOTAR to Crescent City, which is like how it should be. But I am really glad that I reread them. I reread them quicker than I intended to. I was going to do one a month, but then I was like, I just need to keep going. I was so into it. I love the characters. I love the world. I loved Rowan more this time around. I didn't love him in the first one. Aiden is still my guy. Dorian, I can't really say more. But yeah, just so glad I did it. And there you go. The last 3 reviews. So if you made it this far, congrats and thank you. Because I bet you a lot of people didn't, because I also don't listen to the Outro podcast. So thank you for being here. And now I will see you on Monday.